Part 33.6 Surah Al-Ahzab, the Confederates Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Sufi Essence with Hammad Syed. Kanzaliman. Surah Al-Ahzab, the Confederates. Chapter 33, verse 26 to 30. We now enter a phase of critical, spiritual, and legislative transition in our detailed exegesis of Surah Al-Ahzab, the Confederates. The preceding sections culminated in the triumphant, miraculous conclusion of the siege, where Allah Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, through unseen forces, utterly repelled the massive Confederate armies, thereby validating the steadfastness of the true believers. This dramatic and decisive victory now necessitates the immediate and unflinching enforcement of divine justice upon those internal forces who, driven by malice and treachery, sought to betray the Muslim community from within. The 5 verses before us today serve a dual and profound function. They detail the swift, inevitable verdict against the treacherous Jewish tribe of Banu Qurayzah, marking the end of the military crisis. And just as pivotally, they transition the discourse to the most intimate and sacred domestic sphere, the household of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. This segment is monumental, establishing new socio-spiritual realities by detailing the distribution of spoils. Presenting the foundational verse of choice, Āyat al-Takhyīr, to the noble wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and instituting an eternal, rigorously high standard of piety, purity, and accountability for all who occupy the supreme spiritual apex of the Muslim Ummah. Divine justice and the spoils of war, Kanz al-Iman, Quran, Surah Al-Ahzab, the Confederates. Chapter 33, verse 26. And he brought down those of the people of the book who backed them, the Confederates, from their fortresses and cast terror into their hearts. A group of them you killed, and a group of them you made captives. This verse describes the immediate, necessary, and definitive punitive action taken by the Muslim community against the Jewish tribe of Banu Qurayzah, whose treason during the siege represented an existential threat to the very survival of the young Islamic State. Banu Qurayzah, a tribe of the people of the book Al-Takhyīr, had entered into a formal, solemn, and binding defense pact with the Prophet, peace be upon him, upon his arrival in Medina, agreeing to mutual defense and security. Yet, at the moment of the Muslim community's maximum vulnerability, with the overwhelming Confederate armies arrayed outside the hastily dug trench, Banu Qurayzah chose to treacherously violate their covenant. They actively conspired with the enemy, threatening to strike the inner settlements where the Muslim women and children were housed, an act that was nothing less than high treason and a direct attempt to engineer the complete annihilation of the community. Their subsequent punishment was thus an act of essential political and military justice, directly stemming from their deliberate breach of security and loyalty during a moment of supreme peril. The verse is clear that the action was not solely military, but primarily divine in origin. Allah himself orchestrated their downfall, and he brought down those of the people of the book who backed them, the Confederates, from their fortresses. Wa anzala, aladna haram, min al-alkit, min abhim. The term fortresses, abhim, denotes their strongholds, towers, and well-fortified castles, which they believed rendered them utterly immune to the besieged Muslims. Their physical defenses, their arrogance, and their worldly reliance were all utterly nullified by a superior spiritual and moral force as a revocable decree. The most critical element of their defeat was psychological and spiritual, cast terror into their hearts. Wa kakafa f kolbahim al-rubi. This divine injection of terror al-rubi, a profound spiritual paralysis, was the force that shattered their collective will to resist, allowing the small, exhausted Muslim army to enforce the necessary decisive judgment swiftly and conclusively. The final execution of the verdict, which followed a trial judged by a man of their own choosing according to their own law, is then described in direct terms. A group of them you killed, and a group of them you made captives. This was the inescapable, legislated consequence for their act of military treachery and their breach of faith with the nascent state during an existential threat. The verse firmly establishes an uncompromising principle of divine and earthly justice. Treason committed during the preservation of the righteous order requires immediate, decisive, and irreversible justice for the continued safety and establishment of the truth. Kinzelaman. Quran, Surah Al-Ahzab, the Confederates, chapter 33, verse 27. And he made you inheritors of their land, their houses, and their wealth. In a land which you have not trodden, and Allah is able to do everything. Following the execution of divine justice, this verse details the immediate and significant material reward granted to the sincere believers as a direct, visible consequence of their spiritual endurance and unwavering steadfastness. This outcome starkly contrasted with the greed-driven spiritual poverty of the hypocrites. And he made you inheritors of their land, their houses, and their wealth. Wa, Arathikam, Arkaham, Wa, Ibrahim, Wa, Amwalaham. The faithful, who had stood firm and sought only the pleasure of Allah, risking their lives and all their worldly comforts, were now richly rewarded with the very material possessions, land, houses, and wealth that the cowardly hypocrites had desperately feared to lose. This is a profound study in the economics of sincerity. The hypocrites, who fled to secure their fleeting material comforts, ultimately forfeited them. The believers who risked everything for the sake of their covenant inherited what was secured by divine decree. This outcome delivers a powerful, practical, and enduring lesson that resonates eternally. True security, lasting provision, and genuine abundance are found only through sincerity, sacrifice, and perfect reliance on Allah, never through worldly fear, personal greed, or self-serving flight. Furthermore, the verse adds a remarkable, sweeping detail that prophetically expands the horizon of the Muslim community, promising a future of vast expansion and dominion, in a land which you have not trodden. Wa, Arban. Lam Tot, It. This part of the verse points prophetically beyond the immediate local spoils to future significant conquests and the eventual global spread of Islam into vast areas the early Muslim community had not yet been able to physically reach, such as the distant lands of the mighty Byzantine and Persian empires. It was a firm, unqualified promise of the massive rewards in spiritual and physical expansion that would ultimately be granted to the Ummah as a result of their sincere, proven commitment during this initial grueling trial. The verse closes with a powerful, conclusive affirmation of the Creator's unlimited power and absolute capability, and Allah is able to do everything. Wakana, Alru, Albi, Kalishe, in Kodrahan. His power is absolute and unchallengeable, ensuring the certain and effortless fulfillment of both the immediate inheritance of the spoils and the distant sweeping promise of future dominion for those who are true to their covenant. The choice and the standard of purity, Kinzelamin, Quran, Surah Al-Ahzab, the Confederates. Chapter 33, verse 28. O Prophet, peace be upon him, say to your wives, if you desire the worldly life and its adornments, then come, I will give you some provision, and free you with a beautiful release. The Quranic discourse now pivots dramatically from the external politics and military victory to the most intimate, sacred, and ethically sensitive sphere, the household of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The immediate context for this verse, known eternally as the verse of choice Āyat al-Takhyīr, was that the noble wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, had requested a moderate increase in their maintenance and provision, reflecting a natural human desire for comfort and stability after a prolonged period of shared poverty and extreme hardship. This verse, however, elevates the situation immediately from a mere domestic request to a foundational spiritual and ethical dilemma that would define the moral standard for the entire Muslim community for all time. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is commanded by Allah to offer a profound existential choice. If you desire the worldly life and its adornments, then come, I will give you some provision, and free you with a beautiful release. Fata ilana amati kunawa yusarakuna sarban jamklian. The choice is stark, ultimate, and uncompromising. The fleeting, decorated, and temporary comforts of the worldly life and its adornments, al-8 al-dunyu, wazin adib, versus the unparalleled eternal honor of their sacred station as the mothers of the believers. If they chose the world, they would receive a generous provision matin and be freed with a beautiful release, sarban jamklian. A divorce carried out with utmost kindness, respect, and dignity, ensuring their material well-being was secured without malice. This moment was crucial because the moral and spiritual integrity of the Ummah was intrinsically tied to the spiritual altitude of the Prophet's peace be upon him household, which was meant to be the spiritual apex of the entire community, setting the highest possible standard of piety, detachment, and supreme prioritization of the hereafter. Kenzol Aman Quran, Surah Al-Ahzab, the Confederates. Chapter 33, verse 29. And if you desire Allah and His Messenger and the home of the hereafter, then indeed Allah has kept a great reward for the righteous among you. This verse presents the magnificent, sacred alternative to the temporary, fading allure of the world, thereby defining the true, non-negotiable path of the Prophet's peace be upon him household, and the true path for every sincere believer. The second, eternal choice presented to the noble wives is, and if you desire Allah and His Messenger and the home of the hereafter. Wa, in Kantana, Turderna, Alha, Wa, Raslahu, Wa Alda, al-Kachirata. This path requires absolute, uncompromising spiritual prioritization, choosing the eternal reality of Allah's pleasure and the magnificent rewards of the home of the hereafter, Alda, al-Akhira, over and above all the fleeting, temporary comforts, possessions, and security of this physical life. Their choice was to be the ultimate statement of their ultimate loyalty. The promise attached to this supreme choice is nothing less than the divine guarantee of unparalleled, eternal recompense. Then indeed Allah has kept a great reward for the righteous among you. Fina alha, a ada lil mu, sinadi, minkana, adran, amaman. The reward is explicitly described as great amaman, signifying a reward of immense, incomparable spiritual magnitude, and it is specifically reserved for the righteous al-musinit, those women who act with excellence, deep sincerity, and spiritual fortitude in all their conduct. The noble wives, when faced with this profound, clarifying choice, unanimously and instantly chose Allah, His Messenger, and the hereafter. This choice validated their unique spiritual station and immediately established the household of the Prophet, peace be upon him, as the ultimate beacon of detachment, loyalty, and spiritual priority for all Muslim women. Ensuring the moral and spiritual integrity of the Ummah remained robust and eternally uncompromised by the lure of the dunya. Kanzal, Iman, Quran, Surah Al-Ahzab, the Confederates. Chapter 33, verse 30. O wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, whoever among you commits an open indecency, her punishment will be doubled twice. And this is easy for Allah. Having established the immense, unparalleled honor, privilege, and spiritual standing of the Prophets, peace be upon him, wives. This verse immediately introduces the corresponding immense responsibility and geometrically heightened accountability that inevitably accompanies such a lofty spiritual status. The address is direct, severe, and absolute. O wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, whoever among you commits an open indecency, her punishment will be doubled twice. Manyati minkana, biafishatin, mubayinatin, uayaf, lanau, adubu ifain. The term open indecency, fayishatin mubayina, refers to any clear, serious, and manifest sin or moral transgression that is overtly against the divine law and public decency. The fundamental legal and ethical principle established here is one of heightened accountability, spiritual privilege. Proximity to the source of divine message and moral influence carry an equally high spiritual cost for any deviation, because the Prophet's peace be upon him. Wives were in the position of being a moral and ethical standard for the entire community. Their actions were observed, emulated, and carried the weight of legislation. Any sin they committed would have a much greater, more devastating impact on the moral fabric of society. Their direct access to revelation and their unique station meant that their sin was geometrically more serious than that of an ordinary person, thus warranting a doubled punishment in the sight of Allah. This absolute severity in divine law is then closed with the final statement of Allah's unlimited power to enact this judgment, and this is easy for Allah wakana, dunlika, albadel hiaskaban. The lesson for the entire Ummah is clear and uncompromising. The closer one stands to the source of divine guidance, and the greater one's moral and spiritual influence, the more rigorous and exacting the standard of ethical and spiritual. The Hadith on the divine choice, the pivotal verse of choice, Āyat al-Takhyīr, in verses Arshaba and Arshidzo. where the Prophet, peace be upon him, was commanded to offer his noble wives the choice between the lure of worldly comfort and the reward of the hereafter. It's profoundly illuminated by the detailed narration of the event, which highlights the sincerity and spiritual priority of the wives. Particularly Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, in the most authentic narrations. It is narrated in the most authentic sources that when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came to Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, and conveyed the solemn divine command, he stated, recognizing the immense gravity of the decision, "O Aisha, I am going to mention to you a matter, and you should not be hasty in deciding it until you consult your parents." The Prophet, peace be upon him, offered her the safety net of familial counsel, understanding that this choice was life-altering. However, Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, demonstrating her perfect, uncompromised spiritual clarity and prioritizing the eternal, immediately and resolutely replied, "Should I consult my parents regarding this matter? Indeed, I desire Allah and His Messenger and the home of the hereafter." Sahih al-Bukhari, Hadith 4786. This pivotal hadith confirms the absolute divine wisdom of the command and the profound sincerity of the wives, Aisha's, may Allah be pleased with her, instantaneous rejection of the need for worldly consultation and her immediate, firm declaration, "Indeed, I desire Allah and His Messenger and the home of the hereafter," demonstrated a perfect, crystalline spiritual priority that transcended all material concerns. She understood instantly that this was not a question of temporary wealth or domestic politics, but a fundamental defining choice between the eternal reality and the temporary illusion. Her response, and the identical unanimous response of all the other noble wives, proved their utter worthiness of their sacred station as the mothers of the believers and the true spiritual anchors of the Muslim community, setting the highest standard of detachment and loyalty for all future generations who seek to prioritize Allah above all else in their lives. The choice was a moment of supreme spiritual validation. Let us now supplicate, drawing from the profound lessons of these verses, asking Allah to grant us a deeper understanding and to guide our every step. O Allah, Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, still in our hearts the courage to enforce your justice upon those who break their covenants and cast terror into the hearts of our enemies, granting us the inheritance of land and wealth only as a reward for our sincerity, not as a goal in itself. When we are offered the choice between the worldly life and the hereafter, guide us by your light to choose you and your messenger, granting us the great reward reserved for the righteous. We seek your protection from open indecency, and we humbly acknowledge the heightened accountability of our status as your servants, for your judgment is swift and easy for you to enact. May Allah illuminate your heart and mind with the light of this divine ilm. May He make your channel a beacon of guidance for all who seek spiritual clarity and truth. May your efforts be a source of immense reward, and may you be granted the highest stations of paradise. May the peace and blessings of Allah always be upon you and your loved ones. May He grant you unwavering steadfastness on the path of truth. And may your work be a testament to His magnificent names, Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim. Amin.